There have been so many superhero movies released at this point that everybody pretty much already knows what any given origin story will look like long before it's ever been released. Through some machination of fate, an underdog or otherwise unassuming but ultimately good person ends up getting some kind of powers, be they supernatural or mechanical, and has to learn how to use these powers and decide what to do with them while a great threat emerges and looms in the background as the first true test for our new hero. And while all of this is going on, they also have a love interest that they are either pursuing or would like to pursue, with said love interest usually becoming a target of the looming threat in the process. Now, while there have been, of course, some slight deviations from this basic outline, in essence, this is the pattern that pretty much all superhero origin movies follow. In fact, this template has long been overused to the point that even the most die-hard fans have gotten sick of it. However, there have been a few movies to go completely against this format, with one of the best out there quite possibly being Tim Burton's original 1989 Batman. Before a template was ever even defined, this movie subverted almost every beat of the typical superhero origin story, and still makes for a new and different watch even decades after its release, with seemingly hundreds of superhero movies made in the meantime. And today, I'd like to demonstrate just how subversive it actually is. And spoilers for the entire movie will abound. So in case you haven't seen it yet but would like to, you should probably click away from this video. This will be your only warning. Alright, so to start off simply, pretty much everybody at this point knows the origin story of Batman. Born into an extremely wealthy family, Bruce Wayne witnesses the murder of his parents at a young age by a street thug and swears that he will dedicate his life to fighting for justice and against crime so other people don't have to suffer through what he did, using his vast wealth and knowledge to create all of the tools and gadgets that will make him the famous vigilante Batman. Now, I may be missing one or two details here, but that pretty much covers the basics. Any story detailing the origin story of Bruce Wayne's Batman will pretty much follow this exact story. But what makes 1989's Batman approach different is how it goes about telling this origin story. Because most superhero movies would probably begin with Bruce Wayne as a kid, depict the murder of his parents, and show how this molds and inspires him into becoming the Caped Crusader. And indeed, Batman Begins, another movie dedicated to showing Batman's origin, pretty much does just that, dedicating its entire runtime to showing his transformation from Bruce Wayne into Batman, as well as showing all the struggles he has along the way. And it does do a pretty excellent job at that. But once again, the original Batman, by contrast, doesn't take this approach at all. Instead, the movie begins with Batman already starting to take out criminals, and we even see how rumors have started circulating among both the mob and press about some kind of creature that's going after crooks. There's even a fake out where the audience is meant to believe they're watching a young Bruce Wayne, only for the parents to survive the attack and for Batman to take out the criminals a few minutes later. And that is our first introduction to the hero. He just comes out of nowhere and effortlessly stops two petty criminals that had just stolen from and assaulted an innocent family. And from there, things only get more subversive. Because a typical superhero origin movie will place almost all of its focus on the hero in order to spell out their motivations and show everything they have to go through with their newfound abilities, while sometimes changing focus only so that the audience can see what the villain is up to. But here, everything is shifted around. Instead, it's the Joker, the bad guy, that gets the much more traditional origin story, as you see what he's like before his accident, how he comes to be the Joker, and how the resulting accident leads to critical changes in his life. And all the while, Bruce Wayne simply appears to be a character of no consequence, with Batman just randomly showing up to try and stop him and his crooks. To put it simply, there's a reason why some people joke that this is actually the Joker's movie rather than Batman's, because simply put, Jack Napier is put into the role that would normally be reserved for the hero in any other movie. It's his origin and rise you get to see, only it's a descent into evil and insanity rather than heroics and moral responsibility. But that's not where the only subversion comes in either. Because in superhero movies, the focus and point of view is usually strictly on the hero, with the only exceptions once again generally being when the audience gets to see what the villain's doing. But in this case, when the focus isn't being placed on the Joker, it's not being placed on Bruce Wayne either, but instead on Vicky Vale. Until the third act, the audience is following her point of view whenever they aren't following the Joker. And very tellingly, whatever the audience does get to know or find out about both Bruce Wayne and Batman pretty much comes from her or the Joker. In other words, in a complete reversal of what is usually done, the audience is almost totally locked out of the hero's point of view of the villain and love interest. Which was actually a pretty good way to use Vicky Vale, as it gives her more narrative significance beyond what the love interest will usually have. Now sure, there are a few scenes dedicated to Bruce Wayne, but they don't really tell you much about him beyond the fact that he's intelligent. Again, anything you really get to find out about the man himself comes directly from Vicky Vale. For example, the fact that Wayne has barely even been in half his mansion, that Alfred is his only family, that he swings upside down in his spare time, that he's got a problem talking to girls, and even the critical plot detail that his parents were murdered by a criminal when he was a kid are all revealed to us through Vicky Vale. As I said before, until the third act, pretty much the only thing the audience gets to know that she doesn't is that Bruce Wayne and Batman are one and the same, and that he's a lot smarter than he initially appears. And according to Michael Keaton, this is pretty much exactly what he and Tim Burton were going for with the character. To keep him a mystery for most of the runtime, and make the audience start to think, this guy's off. He even suggested the aforementioned swinging scene for that exact reason, to make him seem like even more of an enigma and weirdo. And ironically, keeping the character in the dark for so long almost makes him as intriguing as the Joker, a character that the audience gets to know a lot more intimately because of that. And the brilliance here is that it's only once the Joker accidentally outs himself as his parents' killer that Bruce Wayne finally lets the audience into his own head. In other words, the movie portrays Batman as a man that's so secretive and mentally shut off that he won't even let the audience in. and it's only once he suffers an earth-shattering revelation that he finally lets his guard down and allows the audience to know what he's all about. But even that narratively ties back to Vicky Vale, as once again, he's such a closed book that he can't even open himself up to the one person that he wants to, and it's only after letting the audience in that he's able to finally open himself up to her as well. And honestly, this was a really clever approach to the typical superhero origin story. Because while we do most definitely get to see what drove him to become a superhero, as well as his early days of fighting crime, it also allows the audience to fill in a lot of the blanks of how he got from point A to point B. Instead, it's the villain who gets the typical superhero origin here. We get to see what he's all about, a suave but nasty criminal trying to make his way through the ranks, see the accident that turns him into the clown prince of crime, and then see the results of that transformation. It's just that instead of trying to save people, he's trying to murder them in the most brutal ways possible. Even his interest in Vicky Vale has nothing to do with Batman and is instead motivated by his own perverse lust, in a somewhat disturbing take on the hero and how he usually views his crush. And once again, that was honestly a really smart way to go about it, because everybody knows the Joker. He may just be one of the most famous supervillains ever created, so it was basically a foregone conclusion that if he was going to be in the movie, and especially played by an actor as perfectly suited for the character as Jack Nicholson, then the audience was probably going to be more interested and entertained by him than Batman himself. So instead of trying to pretend that wouldn't be the case, Tim Burton actively lets the Joker steal the spotlight and run wild, all the while keeping his hero in the background so the audience can get to know him very gradually. And as a result, the audience most definitely gets what they want as far as the Joker goes, but also find themselves a lot more intrigued by the main character than they probably would have if it had been done the conventional way. And it was probably for this exact reason that Christopher Nolan opted to use Ra's al Ghul as the villain of Batman's origin movie and saved the Joker for the sequel, as Ra's al Ghul was a lot less likely to take attention away from Bruce Wayne, and by the time the sequel rolled around, he felt it was okay for the Joker to steal some of the spotlight, as he'd already gotten the basics and most important parts out of the way. But once again, Burton's approach works just as effectively, especially because the Joker, particularly as written, was easily able to carry the movie on his own while still being presented firmly as the bad guy. And let's face it, he's such a blast here that it would have honestly been a shame if he hadn't gotten as much screen time as he did. To put it simply, the term less is more most certainly did not apply to this character, and Tim Burton knew it. And Nicholson does prove to be such a show stealer that the audience might almost find it sad to see him go at the end, if not for the fact that it might just make for the greatest death in superhero film history. At least in my opinion. Okay, so to put it all simply, 1989's Batman manages to subvert almost every single beat and cliche associated with the superhero origin story. And what's particularly impressive about that is that it managed to do this long before the template was ever even established, let alone became predictable. And it mainly does this by giving the typical origin story to the villain and makes him the major focus instead of the hero, while also managing to tell the hero's origin in a much more subdued fashion. And splitting the point of view character, again, who's pretty much always the main character in superhero movies, between the villain and the love interest, leaving the audience firmly on the outside looking in as far as the hero himself goes until towards the end. And not only does this allow the audience to much more unapologetically enjoy the villain's antics and behavior, but it also allows the hero to become a more interesting character in the process. Now, some would argue that this was actually a pretty risky move to make with the characters, as it's often said that it's very important, particularly in superhero movies, that the audience get to know the main character right away. But again, in this case it was smart to let the audience instead get to know the villain first, as well as the love interest, so they could have somebody to sympathize with, and let them get to know the hero much more gradually, to the point that by the end they're still not 100% sure what to make of him. Because not only does this solve the narrative issue of the audience becoming more invested in the villain over the main character, by letting it basically be the villain's story and have him take over the spotlight, but it's also caused the movie to age better than a lot of other superhero origin story movies. Because again, after a while the template becomes so monotonous that all of the movies just start to blend into each other. But this movie, even after all this time, still manages to stand out from the rest because of its unique, but extremely effective, take on the format, in addition to many other well-made choices, obviously. Okay, I think that's everything I've got on that. So why don't you guys tell me? Do you believe that Tim Burton's original Batman movie has managed to stand the test of time thanks in part to its extremely different approach to telling the origins of his hero? Or do you believe that doesn't have anything to do with it? Please feel free to let me know in the comments. And like always, you don't have to agree with any opinions expressed in this video. You are just as entitled to your thoughts as I am or anybody else. And thank you all for watching. It is really appreciated. And I hope to see you all next time.